Good morning, everyone. As Donny said, my name is Matt English. I was quite surprised to get a call and a request to speak at this TEDx series in Ratoath. I come from a very ordinary background. I was born in a place called Tempeludigan, which is in the parish of Rathnure in County Wexford. And whilst my life is not extraordinary, it has been special. And it was on that basis I agreed to share a few words with you and use some of your time this morning. I would like to begin by talking about my early years because that certainly formed who I am and what I do today. I was born and part of a very large Irish family. There were 7 boys and 2 girls. I was a middle child born in April '64, sandwiched between my 2 sisters. The first 7 children were born in quick steps between 1961 and 1971. Then there was a break. For the older siblings, we were surprised when John arrived 5 years later on the 11th of March 1976. And then 3.5 years later, Joe, born on the 18th of May 1979. A nice 38th birthday present from my mother. One of the things that was really important around this time as the older children were going through school, the family was hit by a first curveball. John, at only the age of 6 months, fell ill. A number of visits to the GP didn't get to the bottom of it. John was then taken to Waterford Regional Hospital, where he spent a couple of weeks, agonizing weeks for his parents and the family. Thankfully, a consultant, a very good consultant, observed that John was having minor convulsions, minor seizures, and he was rushed to University Hospital in Cork. They thankfully secured medication for him and stabilized his position. A few years later, it became obvious that John had retained some brain damage. And a few years later again, he was assessed with a moderate intellectual disability. Mum and Dad did everything they could to give John the best possible life. And John actually loved sport, even in his early years. And he played hurling, football, and soccer with his brothers and sisters and a few neighbours that joined in with us. And this was really important. But John didn't get to go to Rathnure Primary School like the rest of the family did. John didn't get to go to secondary school in New Ross like the rest of the family did. He went to a special school in Enniscorthy, and he went to a special secondary school. Now, thankfully, those schools had adopted the early version of Special Olympics. And John got very involved at swimming and got very involved at athletics. And indeed, in his teenage years, he brought home many plaques and medals and was the pride of the whole family, and especially Mammy and Daddy. And again, we were all very proud of John, and we all did whatever time we had to get to know John. And I remember when he was about 10 or 11, I said, John, it's high time you learned how to cycle, ride a bicycle. John's determination always exceeded his ability, but somehow his determination won out. And within 3 days, a few bruises and scratches, he was riding the bicycle. And it was brilliant for him because Mum was happy to send him to one of the local shops, to Gaffney's 1.5 miles to the right, or to Burns shop 1.5 miles to the left. And there John not only got to know the shopkeepers, but also many of the customers. At this stage, I had moved to England. I got married to my wife, Breda. We had 2 young children. And I remember asking John if he wouldn't mind being a godfather for our youngest son. Now, thankfully, we had a progressive priest back in the local parish, and he was happy. There was no questions of capacity. And John was so proud to be Harry's godfather. There's some images here of John and Joe, the 2 youngest. John was very passionate about sport, and I remember one great memory. Number 1 in the charts at the time was Dancing at the Crossroads. It was a tribute song to Wexford hurling team from 1996. They had won the All-Ireland and were passionate about sport, as I said, in the family. The photo there, the top left, is John at the homecoming when Wexford received a passionate applause and recognition for their achievements. And that's Stan and Harry there on Joe's shoulders and my own shoulders. I remember very well also making phone calls home from London. I used to buy the £10 phone card. And of course, with every minute, the pence dialed down. I used to always phone to my mother first, sometimes my father, but always at the end of a call, John would come on and he would tell me how Wexford performed or how Rathnewer performed. Indeed, that's the information I want. There was no internet back in the 90s. But what John wanted to also tell me was how every other county did. He wanted to tell me how every county did in football. And I know we're near Fairyhouse here. I had no interest in horses. John did. And I learned something about how the Wexford horses were performing on that call until I ran out of my phone card. Anyhow, I remember being on a business trip. I was away for a full week. It was Valentine's Day. I remember it well. My brother Patrick phoned me. Patrick didn't phone too often. It was expensive ringing from Ireland as well, and there was no WhatsApp back then. But on Valentine's Day, I remember I scrambled in Heathrow on the way home, bought some flowers, bought some chocolates, said I'd get a nice Chinese takeaway on the way home. And I was just in the door when Patrick phoned. And after a few very short words, he said, "John is sick." I said, "Is it serious?" He said, "Yes, it was." I said, "Patrick, do you think I need to come home immediately?" Patrick said, "Probably." So next day, I travelled back by ferry. What I found out was that John, that day, had been diagnosed with testicular cancer, and it was advanced. A few weeks later, all the family were gathered around. We were celebrating John's 21st birthday, and it was a great birthday. We had the usual cakes, presents. In fact, true to form, there was a great soccer match on. I remember it well. It was Liverpool versus Newcastle. Liverpool won 4-3 that day, and I think John enjoyed the match. A few hours later, John passed. It was devastating for the family. It didn't seem right. It wasn't fair, but these things happen. And of course, funeral preparations kicked in pretty quickly. And what we discovered, now the family knew John had a big personality. We knew he was stubborn. We knew he liked divilment. We knew he liked the crack. What we didn't realize is that the special school he went to, he had so many genuine friends, both primary and secondary. He worked in Sydney's filling station in New Ross and also in the cafe. And he had so many friends there. But coming back to our own community of Templeludigan and Rathnewer, everyone in the community knew John. They had stories to tell about him, and he had made a connection in a short life, and that was important to us. Of course, life has to move on, and Breda and I made an early decision after this that we were moving back to Ireland. Community was too important. Life took on a different meaning. And 26 years ago, we settled in County Meath. I was still flying over and back to London and to Europe. And I remember another airport story. Flying back from Amsterdam, Schiphol, heavy fog, flight delayed by 5 hours. Felt like 5 years. Someone kindly get me an Irish Times, and I remember pouring through all the pages. And I turned to the appointment section. I wasn't looking for another job, but there was a full-page spread about the Special Olympics World Games coming to Ireland for the first time. These were amazing games. I applied for the job of Chief Financial Officer with John very much in my mind and was privileged to get that role. And what happened in June 20 years ago was unforgettable. Former President Mary McAleese cited those games as the highlight of her presidency. Nelson Mandela officially opened those games with one of the most heartwarming and thought-provoking speeches I've ever heard. Eunice Kennedy Shriver, founder of Special Olympics, was at her inspirational best, and of course recalled a previous time she was in Ireland in 1963 with her brother John F. Kennedy. But more important than that, 30,000 volunteers gave of their time, gave of their energy and their expertise to run those games. 277 delegations from all over the world descended on Ireland and had the best Céad Míle Fáilte experience ever at host towns and villages and cities throughout Ireland. The Garda Síochána and the PSNI, Police Service in Northern Ireland, who wouldn't have collaborated that much before that, carried the Olympic torch, the flame of hope, to communities throughout Ireland, spreading the message of Special Olympics and what the programme was all about. 7,000 athletes focused, and we focused on their abilities and not their disabilities. They showed their true courage and their kindness during those 2 weeks in June. They all lived the athlete oath. Let me win, but if I cannot win, let me be brave in the attempt. That oath was used first by Special Olympics at the first games in Chicago at Soldier Fields. It was borrowed from the Roman gladiators before they entered the Colosseum. Of course, many of them didn't know their fate. Let me win, but if I cannot win, let me be brave in the attempt. I'm going to step forward now to recent weeks. Okay. Since those games, the legacy has been fantastic. We now have 250 clubs where 8,000 athletes train week in, week out. We have health promotion programs, including Strong Minds, to strengthen our athletes' mental health. We have athlete leaderships to develop the leadership skills of our athletes. We have an athlete vice group so they can influence Special Olympics direction, strategy, etc. We set up young athlete programs so athletes as young as 4 to 12 can have and get involved in sport. 5,500 athletes competed over a 6-month period last year for their chance to represent Ireland. I couldn't be prouder of the 73 athletes that represented Ireland at the Berlin Games and the 35 volunteer coaches, assistant coaches, medical team that accompanied them. You can see them there, Team Ireland. Of course, they returned on Monday and they brought with them gold medals, 24, silver medals, 22, bronze medals, 29. Very important, 47 placement finishes and participation ribbons, and a number of personal bests. The reception they got at Dublin Airport was phenomenal. 600 people showed up, and they were there for hours. And many of those athletes have now returned to their communities throughout this week, and they have been celebrated all over the country, and I know there's a number of parties planned for the weeks ahead. What I want to say in closing, that the theme of the 2003 Games was share the feeling. Share the feeling. I've been to many games over the last 20 years, and I've been at many global conferences, and Special Olympics leaders all over the world tell me that the feeling they had in Ireland has been unequalled anywhere else. The Céad Míle Fáilte they got at their host towns, to the welcome from the 30,000 volunteers at the Games. What I would say also in closing is that the team of the Berlin Games was unbeatable together. I can say that Team Ireland was unbeatable together. We had the most family members and supporters travelling to those games of any. We had 100 volunteers help Germany run the games with their expertise. Ireland was unbeatable together. And finally, I will say Ratoath and every other community across Ireland can be unbeatable together. We all have a part to play. Thank you.